The wind howled like a ravenous beast, tearing through the mountains with an unforgiving fury. Heavy snowflakes swirled in the turbulent air, turning the once thriving forest into a desolate, frozen wasteland. Every tree, every rock, every inch of the earth was blanketed in a thick layer of ice and snow, erasing all traces of warmth and life. It was the kind of storm that consumed everything in its path, leaving only silence and suffering behind. Nestled beneath a fallen tree, hidden from the raging storm, a mother dog curled tightly around her 3 frail pups. Their tiny bodies shivered against her, pressing into her warmth as if trying to absorb what little heat she had left to give. The mother's golden fur, once vibrant and full of life, was now tangled and matted with frost. Her ribs jutted sharply beneath her skin. Each breath she took a battle against the hunger that gnawed at her insides. For days she had braved the bitter cold, wandering through the merciless snow in search of food. Each time she left, she whispered silent reassurances to her pups, promising them she would return. But every trip ended the same way, with nothing. The land was barren, stripped of all sustenance by the relentless winter. She had tried digging beneath the snow, hoping to find buried scraps, but the ground was frozen solid. She had tried following the faint scent of prey, but the creatures of the forest had long since fled or perished. The desperation clawed at her, tightening around her like a noose. Her pups were growing weaker with each passing hour, their whimpers fading into eerie silence. Her heart ached as she thought of the life she had once known, a home filled with warmth, gentle hands stroking her fur, voices filled with love calling her name. She had been part of a family cherished and protected, but that life had been stolen from her the day she was abandoned. She had waited, searching for the familiar faces she loved, hoping they would return for her. But no one came. The world that had once embraced her had turned its back, leaving her to fend for herself in a wilderness that had no mercy. She had wandered for what felt like eternity, her paws growing weary, her spirit breaking under the weight of loneliness, and then, by some cruel twist of fate, she had found herself here, trapped in an unrelenting storm, clinging to the fragile lives of her pups with every ounce of strength she had left. She licked their tiny faces, her tongue barely warm against their icy fur. She whispered silent promises of survival, even as doubt crept into the edges of her mind. The storm raged on, the wind seeping into their small shelter, biting at their fragile bodies. She pressed herself closer to her pups, shielding them as best she could. She knew she couldn't hold on much longer. Her limbs trembled with exhaustion, her vision blurred from weakness, but she couldn't fail them. She wouldn't fail them. The snow had started to fall again, a cruel reminder of their worsening situation. The pups whimpered softly, their tiny bodies nestled against her for warmth, unaware of how dire their reality was. She licked their faces weakly, her maternal instincts stronger than the pain ravaging her body. But she knew they couldn't last much longer like this. Food had become scarce, and her body no longer produced enough milk to nourish them. Their cries of hunger were growing weaker by the day, and she feared that soon she wouldn't be able to keep them alive. The mother dog lay curled in the corner of the small shelter, her body still aching from weeks of starvation and exposure. But for the first time in what felt like forever, there was warmth around her, a roof above her head, and the scent of food lingering in the air. Her pups nestled beside her, whimpered softly in their sleep, their tiny bellies fuller than they had been in days. It should have been a moment of peace, a time for rest. But as she closed her weary eyes, memories of the past flooded her mind. She had once belonged to a home, a real home, a place where she was not just another stray fighting for survival, but a cherished companion. She could still remember the warmth of a soft bed beneath her, the feeling of gentle hands running through her fur, and the sound of laughter filling the air. The little girl had been her favorite. She would throw a ball, giggling as the dog bounded after it, her tail wagging with pure joy. The mother dog had been happy then, truly happy. But those days felt like a distant dream now, a cruel trick played by a world that had turned so cold. She had not always known hunger, nor had she always been forced to seek shelter beneath broken-down cars and empty alleyways. She had been loved once, fed every day, played with, and cared for, until one day she wasn't. She couldn't understand why it happened. One day her family had taken her for a ride, just as they had done so many times before. She had her head out the window, her tongue flapping in the wind, savoring the familiar scent of home mixed with the fresh breeze. But then they stopped. Not at the park, not at the vet, but somewhere unfamiliar, a road she had never seen before. The little girl had stayed in the car, her small hands pressed against the window, her face confused and sad. The mother dog's heart had pounded as she was led out of the car, her tail wagging uncertainly. Then, just like that, the door had closed behind her. The car drove away. She had chased after them, her paws pounding against the rough pavement, her heart racing in confusion. She barked, pleading for them to stop, to turn back, to take her home. But the car never slowed. It never came back. And when she could run no more, when her legs finally gave out beneath her, she collapsed on the side of the road, panting, trembling, watching the last piece of her life disappear into the distance. She had waited there for hours, believing it had been a mistake, believing they would come back, that they had just taken a wrong turn, that little girl would cry and beg her parents to turn around. But as the sun set and the night grew cold, reality sank in. She had been left behind. The days that followed were a blur of hunger, fear, and loneliness. She wandered, searching for food, searching for shelter, searching for them, but no one came for her. She grew thinner, weaker. She learned to avoid humans, to fear the sound of approaching footsteps. She learned that not all people were kind, that the world outside a loving home was cruel and unforgiving. Then she had her pups, and despite the pain, despite the suffering, she had found something worth living for again. They needed her, and she would not fail them the way she had been failed. A soft whimper from one of her pups brought her back to the present. She turned her head, licking the tiny pup's face, comforting him. She was no longer alone. She had them now. And maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who wouldn't leave her behind this time. Hunger and desperation. The days passed in a relentless cycle of hunger and exhaustion. The mother dog had done everything she could to find food, but the streets had been unforgiving. The bitter cold made scavenging even harder, and every discarded scrap she found was fought over by other strays, bigger and stronger than her. Still, she tried. For her pups, she had to try. Her body had become frail, her ribs jutting out beneath her thinning fur. She moved slower than before, her limbs weak from the constant struggle. Every day she ventured farther, risking leaving her pups alone for longer periods in search of something, anything, that could fill their tiny stomachs. But the hunger was always there, gnawing at her insides like an endless ache, a weight she could never shake. And no matter how hard she fought, it was winning. She had seen other dogs fall victim to the same battle, the ones who had once been strong but had finally succumbed to the cruel reality of the streets. She refused to let that be her fate. More importantly, she refused to let that be her pups' fate. They were too young, too fragile. They didn't deserve this life. They should have been safe in a home, curled up in warmth, their bellies full. But instead, they were here, cold, hungry, and completely dependent on a mother who was slowly losing the fight against starvation. One evening, after a fruitless day of searching, she returned to the makeshift shelter where her pups waited. They squeaked and whined as she approached, sensing that she had come back empty-pawed once again. She lowered herself beside them, curling her body around them to keep them warm. The disappointment in herself was crushing. She licked their tiny heads, soothing them the only way she could. Then the hunger became unbearable. It started as a dull pain, but it quickly escalated, spreading through her body with an intensity that made her tremble. Her vision blurred, her ears buzzed, and for a brief moment she felt as though she might collapse. She tried to steady herself, focusing on the rhythmic rise and fall of her pups' tiny chests. They needed her. She could not let this break her. The mother dog closed her eyes and took slow, deep breaths. Her body screamed for nourishment, but there was none. She knew she could not keep this up much longer. If she didn't find food soon, her strength would fail her completely. And if that happened, her pups wouldn't stand a chance. Just then, a noise caught her attention. Her ears perked up, and her body tensed. Footsteps. Human footsteps. They were near. She had learned to fear humans, to avoid them whenever possible. But desperation made her bold. If there was even a chance, no matter how small, that she could find food, she had to take it. Her pups' survival depended on it. She forced herself to stand, her legs wobbling beneath her. Slowly, cautiously, she crept toward the source of the sound. It was risky. She knew. But at that moment, the risk of doing nothing felt far greater. The rescue team. The storm had grown fiercer overnight, its howling winds rattling the branches of the leafless trees and covering the ground in a thick blanket of snow. It was the kind of storm that made survival nearly impossible for any animal caught in its wrath. Yet, for Alex and his team, this was exactly the kind of night they were prepared for. Alex had dedicated his life to rescuing abandoned animals, especially those left to fend for themselves in harsh conditions. His team, a group of dedicated animal lovers, shared the same mission. They had spent years patrolling the wilderness, searching for creatures who had no voice to call for help. And tonight, as the storm raged on, their search was more urgent than ever. "The temperatures are dropping fast," Alex called over the howling wind, adjusting his thick coat. "If we don't find any strays soon, they won't make it till morning." His team nodded in agreement, their faces partially covered with scarves to keep the biting cold at bay. Armed with flashlights, thermal scanners, and emergency supplies, they moved carefully through the snow-covered terrain, their eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. Alex's heart clenched every time he thought about the countless animals left behind by careless owners. It was a tragedy he had seen too many times before. Loyal pets abandoned as if their lives meant nothing. They didn't understand why they were suddenly left alone, why the hands that once fed them no longer reached out for them. The thought made Alex push forward with even more determination. After nearly an hour of searching, one of his team members, Grace, suddenly halted. "I think I see something," she shouted, pointing her flashlight toward a cluster of trees. Alex rushed to her side, squinting into the darkness. At first, it looked like nothing more than a mound of snow, but then movement. A small, shivering shape huddled beneath the roots of an old tree. "It's a dog!" Grace gasped. "And she's not alone." Alex's breath caught in his throat as he realized what he was looking at. A mother dog, barely more than skin and bones, curled protectively around 3 tiny pups. She lifted her head weakly, her exhausted eyes filled with both fear and determination. Even in her weakened state, she would fight to protect her little ones. "She must have been out here for days," Alex muttered, his voice heavy with sadness. "Look at her. She's starving. And those pups, if we don't get them warm soon, they won't make it." Slowly, he and Grace knelt down, trying not to startle the mother. She let out a low growl, though it was clear she had little energy to back it up. "Easy, girl," Alex said gently, reaching into his bag for a piece of food. "We're here to help. You don't have to be afraid." The mother dog eyed him warily, her body tense, but when the scent of food reached her nose, her resolve wavered. Hunger won over fear. She hesitated, then weakly took a bite, her sharp eyes never leaving Alex's face. "That's it," he murmured encouragingly. "You're safe now. We're going to take care of you and your babies." After a few more moments of reassurance, the mother dog finally allowed Alex to slip a blanket around her and her pups. With incredible care, they placed the fragile family in a crate lined with warm fabric, shielding them from the icy wind. As the team made their way back to their rescue vehicle, Alex felt a sense of relief, but he knew the fight wasn't over yet. The mother dog and her pups still had a long road to recovery ahead of them, but at least now they had a chance. As the storm raged on behind them, Alex tightened his grip on the crate. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I promise."
The storm raged on as Alex and his team carried the fragile mother dog and her 3 tiny pups toward the rescue vehicle. The bitter wind howled through the trees, cutting through even the thickest layers of their winter gear. But despite the numbing cold, their focus remained on the weak family they had just found. Each step through the deep snow felt heavier, burdened not just by the weight of the crate they carried, but by the gravity of the moment itself. As they reached the rescue van, Alex carefully set the crate down and knelt beside it, checking on the mother dog. She was so weak that her body barely shivered, her strength nearly spent. Her pups, small and fragile, huddled close to her, their tiny bodies trembling against the freezing air. It was a miracle that they had survived this long in such brutal conditions. "She's barely hanging on," Grace whispered, her breath visible in the freezing air. "And the pups, they're so cold." Alex nodded grimly, his heart aching at the sight before him. He had seen many cases of abandonment in his years of rescuing animals, but something about this mother's sheer determination to keep her babies alive in such impossible conditions hit him differently. She had fought against hunger, the storm, and the bitter cold with everything she had, and now she was on the verge of collapse. "We need to act fast," Alex said, his voice firm despite the lump forming in his throat. He reached into the emergency supply bag and pulled out a thick thermal blanket, wrapping it gently around the mother and her pups. "We'll get them warm first, then straight to the shelter." Carefully, he placed heating pads beneath the blanket, hoping to restore some warmth to their fragile bodies. The mother dog let out a faint whimper as the heat seeped into her frozen limbs, her head barely lifting from where it rested. Her eyes met Alex's, filled with exhaustion and uncertainty, but somewhere deep within them, there was also a flicker of trust. "You're going to be okay," he murmured, running a gentle hand over her matted fur. "We won't let anything happen to you or your babies." Grace opened the van doors, and Alex lifted the crate into the back, ensuring it was secure. The other team members quickly climbed in, and within moments, the engine roared to life, cutting through the silence of the storm. The drive back to the shelter was tense. Alex kept glancing back at the mother dog, silently willing her to hold on just a little longer. "How's she doing?" one of the team members asked from the front seat. "She's weak, but she's still with us," Alex replied, his voice laced with concern. "The pups are barely moving, though. We need to get fluids and warmth into them fast." The drive felt longer than usual, every second stretching unbearably. The storm made the roads treacherous, forcing them to drive cautiously. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, the shelter came into view, its lights cutting through the snowy darkness like a beacon of hope. As soon as they arrived, the team rushed the crate inside, where a team of veterinarians and volunteers were already waiting. The warmth of the shelter wrapped around them like a comforting embrace, offering a stark contrast to the freezing nightmare outside. Alex set the crate on a prepared examination table, stepping back as the vets immediately got to work. "She's severely malnourished," one of the vets observed as they carefully examined the mother dog. "Dehydration, frostbite on her paws. She's been through hell." Another vet checked the pups, their tiny bodies almost motionless. "They're ice cold. We need to start warming them up immediately." The team sprang into action, wrapping the pups in warmed blankets and placing them on heating pads. An four was gently inserted into the mother's frail leg, delivering much-needed fluids into her system. Her breathing was shallow, but she was still fighting. Alex watched anxiously, his fists clenched at his sides. He had seen too many animals lose their battles over the years, and he wasn't ready to let this family be another tragic statistic. "Come on, girl," he whispered under his breath. "Stay with us. Your babies need you." Minutes stretched into an hour as the vets worked tirelessly. Slowly, the mother dog's breathing became steadier. Her body, once on the brink of collapse, began to regain some warmth. One of the pups let out a faint squeak, a tiny but powerful sign of life. Grace let out a breath she had been holding. "They're going to make it, aren't they?" Alex exhaled, the tightness in his chest easing just a little. "They've got a fighting chance." That's more than they had out there. For the first time that night, a flicker of hope sparked in his heart. The battle wasn't over, but at least now, the mother dog and her pups had a chance at a future, one where they would never be alone again. The moment the mother dog and her pups were safely inside the shelter, the real fight began. The rescue had been only the first step. Now, it was a race against time to pull them back from the brink of death. Every second counted, and Alex and his team knew they had no margin for error. The veterinarians worked swiftly, assessing the fragile condition of the mother and her tiny pups. The mother dog was still barely responsive, her body too weak to even lift her head. Her breathing was ragged, her fur was soaked through, and her limbs trembled with exhaustion. The three puppies, no bigger than the palms of their rescuers' hands, were eerily still. Their tiny chests rose and fell weakly, their bodies frighteningly cold to the touch. "We need to get their temperatures up immediately," Dr. Bennett, the head veterinarian, instructed. "They're hypothermic. If we don't act fast, they won't survive the night." Alex felt his stomach clench as he watched the team spring into action. Heated blankets were wrapped around the mother and her pups, and warm fluids were started immediately. The mother dog whimpered weakly as the needle slid into her frail leg, but she barely had the strength to resist. "Come on, girl," Alex whispered, crouching beside her. "You made it this far. Just hold on a little longer." The team placed the puppies inside a specialized incubator designed to regulate their body temperatures. They were so small and fragile that they barely stirred as the warmth slowly began to seep into their tiny bodies. Every passing second felt like an eternity as they waited for any sign of improvement. Grace, standing beside Alex, let out a shaky breath. "I can't believe they survived out there for so long. She must have used every ounce of strength she had just to keep them warm." Alex nodded, his throat tightening. "She did what any mother would do. She fought for them, even when she had nothing left. Now, it's our turn to fight for her." Bennett monitored the mother dog closely, checking her vitals. "She's severely malnourished. We'll need to feed her gradually. Too much food at once could shock her system. But she's responding to the fluids. That's a good sign." Hours passed, each moment filled with tension. The team took turns monitoring the mother and her pups, refusing to let their exhaustion slow them down. They had all seen too many animals come in too late. They weren't about to let that happen again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a faint movement caught Alex's eye. One of the pups wiggled slightly in the incubator, stretching a tiny paw. Then another let out a soft, barely audible squeak. Grace gasped. "They're moving." Alex felt a rush of relief. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The pups were warming up, and their tiny bodies were slowly regaining strength. The mother dog, though still weak, opened her eyes slightly, her gaze falling upon her pups. It was a look of instinctual protectiveness, of love that transcended pain and exhaustion. She let out a weak whimper as if calling to them. Alex gently reached out, stroking her head. "They're okay. You did good, Mama." The mother dog let out a slow, tired breath, her body finally relaxing slightly. She wasn't out of danger yet, but for the first time since they had found her in the storm, she was safe. As the storm raged on outside, Alex leaned back against the wall, exhaustion finally settling over him. But despite his fatigue, he felt lighter than he had in days. Against all odds, this little family had survived. Now, they just needed time to heal. And Alex was determined to give them all the time they needed. The moment the mother dog was placed inside the shelter, it was evident how dire her condition was. She lay still, barely breathing, her ribs protruding from beneath her matted fur. Her once bright eyes were now dull and lifeless, her body so weak she could hardly lift her head. But despite her fragile state, her instincts remained strong. She kept her gaze locked on the incubator that held her pups. Alex and the team watched in tense silence as Dr. Bennett examined her. "She's severely malnourished," he murmured, shaking his head. "Her body has been in starvation mode for too long. Her organs could start shutting down if we don't act fast." Grace, standing beside Alex, placed a hand over her mouth, her eyes brimming with worry. "How is she even still alive?" "Mothers will do anything for their young, Dr. Bennett replied grimly, "even at the cost of their own lives." Alex clenched his fists. He had seen animals in terrible conditions before, but something about this mother dog's unwavering devotion hit him harder than usual. Even now, in the warmth of the shelter, she wasn't focused on herself. Her eyes darted toward the incubator where her pups were being monitored. She let out a faint whimper, trying to move toward them, but her body failed her. She collapsed back onto the soft bedding with a weak exhale. "She's refusing food," one of the vet assistants reported. "We're trying, but she won't eat." Dr. Bennett frowned. "She's prioritizing them over herself. It's an instinctual response. If she thinks there isn't enough food, she'll refuse it so that her pups can have a better chance of survival." The storm raged on as Alex and his team carried the fragile mother dog and her 3 tiny pups toward the rescue vehicle. The bitter wind howled through the trees, cutting through even the thickest layers of their winter gear. But despite the numbing cold, their focus remained on the weak family they had just found. Each step through the deep snow felt heavier, burdened not just by the weight of the crate they carried, but by the gravity of the moment itself. As they reached the rescue van, Alex carefully set the crate down and knelt beside it, checking on the mother dog. She was so weak that her body barely shivered, her strength nearly spent. Her pups, small and fragile, huddled close to her, their tiny bodies trembling against the freezing air. It was a miracle that they had survived this long in such brutal conditions. "She's barely hanging on," Grace whispered, her breath visible in the freezing air. "And the pups, they're so cold." Alex nodded grimly, his heart aching at the sight before him. He had seen many cases of abandonment in his years of rescuing animals, but something about this mother's sheer determination to keep her babies alive in such impossible conditions hit him differently. She had fought against hunger, the storm, and the bitter cold with everything she had, and now she was on the verge of collapse. "We need to act fast," Alex said, his voice firm despite the lump forming in his throat. He reached into the emergency supply bag and pulled out a thick thermal blanket, wrapping it gently around the mother and her pups. "We'll get them warm first, then straight to the shelter." Carefully, he placed heating pads beneath the blanket, hoping to restore some warmth to their fragile bodies. The mother dog let out a faint whimper as the heat seeped into her frozen limbs, her head barely lifting from where it rested. Her eyes met Alex's, filled with exhaustion and uncertainty, but somewhere deep within them, there was also a flicker of trust. The shelter had seen its fair share of rescues, but this one felt different. The entire team, from the veterinarians to the volunteers, was invested in the survival of the mother dog and her fragile puppies. Every second counted, and no one was willing to let them slip away without a fight. Bennett and his medical team worked tirelessly, monitoring the mother's vitals and adjusting her treatment as needed. For fluids were administered carefully, ensuring she received the hydration and nutrients her body so desperately needed. The rescue team had fought against nature to bring her and her pups to safety. Now, the caretakers had to battle against time and the toll of starvation. Alex sat by the incubator, watching the newborn pups breathe in their sleep. They were so small, so fragile, their bodies rising and falling with each shallow breath. "How are they doing?" he asked one of the vet assistants, his voice hushed. "They're stable, but still weak," she replied, adjusting the temperature of the incubator. They wouldn't have lasted much longer out in the cold. Their little bodies were shutting down. Alex exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting toward the mother dog. She lay motionless, her breathing slow and labored. He could see the weight of exhaustion in her every movement, the toll that starvation and exposure had taken on her body. Yet, despite it all, she still tried to turn her head toward her puppies. "She's trying to get to them," Grace murmured, standing beside Alex. "She won't rest until she knows they're safe." Bennett nodded. "She needs rest, but I think she also needs reassurance." He carefully lifted one of the pups from the incubator and, after ensuring it was warm enough, placed it gently beside the mother dog. A ripple of tension passed through the room as everyone watched, waiting to see what would happen. The mother's ear twitched, then her nose, as if she was catching the scent of her baby. With the last bit of strength she had left, she shifted slightly, her body curling protectively around the pup. A collective sigh of relief passed through the team. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. "She's still fighting," Alex murmured. "She hasn't given up." The hours passed in a blur of tireless care. Volunteers took turns sitting with the mother dog, speaking to her in soothing tones. The vet team adjusted her as needed, ensuring she received the necessary nutrients to regain her strength. Slowly, but surely, she began to show signs of improvement. She was still weak, but her breathing became steadier, and she even managed to drink a bit more of the nutrient-rich broth. By the following morning, the transformation was undeniable. The mother dog, though still fragile, had gained enough strength to lift her head. Her eyes, which had once been dull and vacant, now held a glimmer of recognition as she gazed at the team around her. She no longer looked like a dog on the brink of death. She looked like a mother determined to survive for her pups. Alex reached out and gently stroked her head. "You did good, Mama," he whispered. "You're safe now." She let out a soft whimper, but this time, it wasn't one of distress, it was one of trust. And for the first time since she had been found, Alex believed she would make it. The road to recovery would be long, but she wasn't alone anymore. The entire shelter was standing behind her, ready to fight for her just as she had fought for her babies. And for the first time, hope began to shine through the darkness. The mother dog lay weakly on the blanket-covered floor of the shelter, her body still recovering from the brutal cold and starvation she had endured. Though her limbs ached and her strength was barely returning, her heart remained strong. Her instincts as a mother overpowered her exhaustion. She nudged her tiny, helpless pups toward the rescuers with whatever strength she had left, as if pleading for their help. Alex knelt down beside her, watching in awe as she gently pushed the smallest pup forward with her nose. Her eyes, deep pools of suffering and love, locked onto his. There was no mistaking what she was asking. She trusted them. She was too weak to care for her babies on her own, and she knew that these humans, the ones who had risked everything to save her, would now have to take on the responsibility of keeping her little ones alive. Grace, who had been observing the interaction, felt her throat tighten. "She's giving them to us," she whispered. "She's asking us to keep them safe." Dar. Bennett sighed, his voice soft but firm. "She knows she can't do it alone anymore. It's heartbreaking, but it's also incredible. She trusts us." One of the puppies let out a tiny whimper, its frail body trembling as Alex carefully lifted it into his arms. He cradled the pup against his chest, feeling the small heartbeat flutter against his fingertips. The little one was still so fragile, but there was warmth now, warmth that hadn't been there before. The mother dog watched closely, her eyes never leaving her baby as Alex carefully placed the pup into the incubator. Once inside, the tiny creature snuggled into the warmth, its breathing becoming steadier. The mother exhaled softly, as if relieved. Then, despite her exhaustion, she nudged another pup forward, repeating the same silent plea. One by one, each of the puppies was gently moved into the incubator. Each time, the mother watched, her eyes scanning the rescuers with a silent question, "Will they be okay?" And each time, Alex and his team reassured her with their soft words and careful touch. "You're an amazing mother," Grace murmured, stroking the dog's head. "You did everything you could for them. Now, let us help." The mother's ears flicked slightly, and for the first time, she relaxed against the soft blanket beneath her. The battle she had fought, against the cold, against starvation, against hopelessness, was over. She had done everything in her power to keep her puppies alive, and now, she was entrusting their future to these humans. As the night stretched on, the team continued their care, ensuring the puppies received the nutrients they needed. The mother dog, though still weak, watched them with quiet patience, her tired eyes filled with trust. When Alex placed a small bowl of warm broth in front of her, she hesitated for a moment before finally taking slow, careful laps. "That's it, Mama," Alex encouraged. "You have to get strong for them." She lifted her head slightly, glancing toward the incubator where her pups were safe and warm. And for the first time since being rescued, she closed her eyes, not in exhaustion or defeat, but in the peace of knowing her little ones were finally safe. She had fought, she had endured, and now, she had placed her faith in the hands of those who had saved her. And in return, Alex and his team silently vowed that they would never let her or her pups down. The mother dog's silent plea had been heard, and she would never have to fight alone again. The shelter had become a sanctuary of hope, a place where warmth replaced the bitter cold and hunger gave way to nourishment. The mother dog, though still weak, had found a fragile sense of peace. Her pups were in safe hands now, and under the watchful eyes of the rescue team, they were beginning their journey toward recovery. Alex sat beside the incubator, his fingers resting gently on the glass as he observed the tiny creatures inside. Each one was still fragile, their bodies small and delicate, but there was a spark of life in them now that hadn't been there before. Their breathing, once shallow and labored, had grown steadier. Their bodies, once cold and limp, now twitched with faint movements as they curled into the warmth of the incubator. Grace entered the room, carrying a syringe filled with specially formulated milk. "It's time for another feeding," she said softly. "Let's see how they do." Bennett, who had been monitoring the mother dog's condition, nodded. "They're showing signs of improvement, but they're still far from stable. Every feeding is crucial." One by one, the tiny pups were carefully removed from the incubator and placed in the arms of the rescuers. Alex cradled the smallest of the litter, a tiny pup with a patch of white fur on its forehead. He positioned the syringe near its mouth, gently coaxing it to drink. For a moment, there was no response. Then, with a weak but determined effort, the pup latched onto the syringe, drawing in the life-sustaining milk drop by drop. "That's it," Alex murmured, his heart swelling with relief. "Come on, little one. You can do this." Nearby, Grace was feeding another pup, her expression full of encouragement as she watched the tiny animal take in the nourishment. "They're fighters," she said, "just like their mama." The mother dog, still resting on her blanket, lifted her head slightly. Though she was still recovering, her eyes remained locked on her babies. Even in her weakened state, she wanted to be close to them, to watch over them as she always had. Alex noticed her struggling to rise and gently placed a reassuring hand on her side. "They're okay, Mama. We've got them." She let out a quiet exhale, her body relaxing slightly, though her gaze never wavered. Hours passed, and the pups continued their slow but steady progress. Their bellies, once hollow with hunger, were now full. Their tiny bodies, once motionless, squirmed with newfound energy. Each milestone, no matter how small, was celebrated with cautious optimism. As the night deepened, Alex and Grace remained by the pup's side, unwilling to leave them alone. Bennett monitored their vitals, ensuring that their temperatures remained stable and that they showed no signs of distress. "They're improving faster than I expected," he admitted. "A few more days of care, and they might just pull through." Alex glanced toward the mother dog, who had finally dozed off, exhaustion overtaking her now that she knew her pups were safe. "She never gave up on them," he said quietly. "That's why they're still here. Because she fought for them." Grace smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "And now, it's our turn to fight for them." As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the shelter's windows, casting a golden glow over the small family. The pups, though still fragile, had survived another night, and with each passing hour, they were growing stronger, fueled by the love and dedication of those who refused to give up on them. The journey was far from over, but hope had taken root. The mother dog had done her part. Now, it was up to the rescuers to ensure that her babies would have the future she had fought so hard to give them. Though the shelter was filled with hope and warmth, the mother dog's condition was taking a turn for the worse. While her pups grew stronger with each passing day, her body, exhausted from weeks of starvation and exposure, struggled to recover. She had poured every ounce of her strength into keeping her little ones alive, and now, she was paying the price. Alex sat by her side, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. The once fierce determination in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a quiet resignation. Yet, even as weakness overtook her, she still turned her head toward the incubator where her pups rested, her maternal instincts unbroken. Bennett knelt beside her, carefully pressing his stethoscope against her side. His brow furrowed as he listened to her labored breathing. "Her vitals are dropping," he murmured. "She's severely dehydrated, and her body is struggling to repair itself." Grace, who had been monitoring the pups, turned sharply. "But she was doing better, wasn't she?" Bennett shook his head. "She's been prioritizing her pups over herself for too long. Her body is shutting down. A heavy silence settled in the room. The mother dog had given everything she had to ensure her baby's survival. Now, she had nothing left for herself. Alex ran a hand over his face, struggling to suppress his frustration. There has to be something we can do. We're doing everything we can, Dr. Bennett assured him. But her body is dangerously depleted. She needs fluids, nutrients, and rest. Alex reached out, gently stroking the mother dog's fur. She's a fighter. She wouldn't have made it this far if she wasn't. Dr. Bennett nodded. That's true, but even the strongest fighters need help. They set to work immediately, administering 4 fluids to replenish what her body had lost. Grace placed a soft blanket over her frail body, whispering reassurances as she adjusted the medical equipment. The mother dog let out a weak sigh but didn't resist. She was too tired to fight. Throughout the night, Alex remained at her side, refusing to leave her alone. Every few hours, Grace would check on her, noting the small changes in her breathing and heart rate. There were moments when they feared she wouldn't make it through the night, but somehow, she held on. Morning arrived with a quiet stillness. The pups, oblivious to their mother's struggle, whimpered softly in the incubator, their tiny bodies nestled together for warmth. The mother dog lifted her head slightly, her eyes searching for them. Even in her fragile state, they were still her priority. Alex moved closer, his voice gentle. They're okay. They're safe. She blinked slowly, as if acknowledging his words, before resting her head back down. Bennett sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. She's stable for now, but the next few days will be critical. Alex clenched his fists. He had seen animals come back from the brink before, but this felt different. This wasn't just another rescue case. This was a mother who had sacrificed everything for her pups. And now, it was their turn to fight for her. As the shelter filled with the soft sounds of animals stirring awake, the rescuers made a silent vow. They would not let her sacrifice be in vain. They would do whatever it took to save her. She had held on for her pups. Now, it was time for them to hold on for her. For days, the mother dog had fought against exhaustion, hunger, and the fear of the unknown. Every moment in the shelter had been a battle between her instincts and the unfamiliar environment surrounding her. But as much as she had resisted, something was changing. The presence of the humans who had saved her and her pups was no longer a threat. It was beginning to feel like safety. Alex had been by her side every day, never forcing his presence on her but never leaving her alone either. He spoke in hushed tones, offering her gentle reassurances. He understood that trust couldn't be rushed, it had to be earned. And so, he waited. One evening, as the rain tapped softly against the shelter windows, Alex sat beside her crate, speaking in the same soothing voice he had used since the day he found her. You've done so much on your own. You don't have to fight anymore. You're safe here. The mother dog, curled protectively around her pups, flicked her ears at his voice. Her weary eyes met his for the briefest moment before she turned away. But something in her posture had shifted. She was listening. Grace watched from across the room, her heart swelling with hope. She's starting to recognize you, she whispered. Alex nodded, keeping his voice soft. She's trying to decide if she can trust us. Over the next few days, small changes began to appear. The mother dog no longer flinched when Alex reached out. She didn't shrink away when the caretakers checked on her pups. She still guarded them fiercely, but she was beginning to understand that these humans meant no harm. One night, as Alex prepared to leave the shelter, he knelt beside her crate one last time. I'll be back in the morning, okay? You and your little ones are safe here. As he turned to go, he felt a gentle nudge against his hand. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. The mother dog, hesitant but deliberate, had pushed her nose against his fingers. It was the first time she had reached out to him on her own. Alex's heart pounded as he slowly, carefully, let his hand rest against her fur. He didn't move, didn't push, just let her set the pace. And after a long, silent moment, she allowed it. Tears stung Grace's eyes as she watched. "She's trusting you." A lump formed in Alex's throat, but he swallowed it down, offering the mother dog a small, grateful smile. "Yeah. I think she is." The moment was fleeting, but it was a turning point. From that day on, the mother dog no longer turned away when Alex entered the room. She allowed him to check on her pups without growling, and though fear still lingered in her eyes, there was something else there now, something fragile, but growing stronger. Hope. For the first time since she had been abandoned, she wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be. The battle for survival had been long and unforgiving, but finally, there was a glimmer of hope. The mother dog, frail and exhausted, had spent days teetering on the edge of survival. Her body was weak, her spirit battered, but something had begun to change. The warmth of the shelter, the soft voices of the rescuers, and the gentle care of Alex and his team had begun to penetrate the layers of fear and pain that had consumed her. At first, the changes were small. She no longer trembled when Alex sat beside her crate, and though she still curled protectively around her pups, her eyes no longer held the same desperate wildness. Her body was finally being given the nourishment it needed, though she still hesitated to eat much, ensuring her pups were fed first. Alex watched over her tirelessly. Every moment counted, and he knew that if she didn't regain her strength soon, her body would give out completely. Grace and the rest of the rescue team did everything they could, providing her with warm blankets, feeding her small portions throughout the day, and keeping the environment as stress-free as possible. One evening, as a soft drizzle pattered against the shelter's windows, Alex sat beside her once more. He spoke in soothing tones, just as he had done since the day he found her. "You're doing so well," he murmured. "Your babies are safe. And you're safe too." The mother dog's ears twitched at his voice. Her breathing, slow and labored, seemed just a little steadier than before. She blinked at him, the hesitation still there, but the fear was beginning to fade. Alex took this as a good sign and continued his gentle reassurances. Over the next few days, she began to show more signs of improvement. She ate more, though still sparingly. Her posture was less tense, and her once dull eyes started to regain a faint glimmer of life. The rescuers noticed the change and felt a renewed sense of determination. The pups were thriving under their care, and now, their mother was finally fighting back against the darkness that had once gripped her. The biggest breakthrough came one quiet night. As Alex finished his rounds and prepared to leave the shelter, he knelt beside her crate one last time. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said softly, smiling. "You're doing so well. Just keep holding on." Just as he turned to go, he felt a soft, hesitant nudge against his hand. He froze, his heart pounding. Slowly, he turned back to see her amber eyes looking straight into his. It was the first time she had willingly reached out to him. His breath caught in his throat as he cautiously extended his hand. She didn't flinch away. Instead, she pressed her damp nose against his fingers, just for a second, before pulling back. It was the smallest gesture, but to Alex, it meant everything. Tears welled in Grace's eyes as she watched from across the room. "She's trusting you," she whispered. A smile broke across Alex's face. He knew how significant this moment was. After everything she had endured, being abandoned, surviving in the cold, fighting to keep her pups alive, she was finally allowing herself to believe in something better. She was choosing to trust. From that moment on, the changes came faster. She let Alex and the rescuers near her pups without growling. She accepted the food they offered without hesitation. And though she still had a long road ahead, the spark of hope had been reignited in her weary heart. For the first time since she had been left behind, she wasn't just surviving, she was starting to live again. The storm that had raged outside was nothing compared to the battle the mother dog had fought within. Days of struggle, of hunger, of fear had all led to this moment. Now, as the winds outside finally began to settle and the skies cleared, it seemed as though the storm in her heart was passing as well. Inside the warmth of the shelter, she lay curled around her pups, their tiny bodies pressed against her for comfort. They were safe, growing stronger each day, and though exhaustion still weighed heavily on her, she could feel something she hadn't in a long time: peace. The rescuers had given her and her pups a second chance at life, and though she didn't fully understand it, she knew she was no longer alone. Alex watched her closely, noticing the subtle changes. Her breathing had steadied, and though she was still weak, her body no longer trembled with cold or fear. The sharp alertness in her eyes had softened. She still kept her pups close, but there was no longer the desperate, wild protectiveness that had once consumed her. Instead, there was trust, a fragile but growing belief that she was finally safe. As the days passed, the effects of proper care became more visible. Her ribs were no longer as prominent, and her fur, though still rough and unkempt, had regained some of its natural sheen. She ate more willingly now, no longer pushing away food out of instinct to protect her young. She had realized that for her to care for them, she needed to be strong too. One evening, as the last remnants of the storm disappeared beyond the horizon, Alex sat beside her crate, watching her closely. "You've been through so much," he whispered, "but you're safe now." She lifted her head slightly, her ears twitching at the sound of his voice. Her golden eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no fear, only quiet understanding. Slowly, she stretched her nose toward him, sniffing his hand before resting her head back down with a soft sigh. Grace, who had been watching from a distance, smiled warmly. "She knows, Alex," she said softly. "She knows she's home." And in that moment, he knew it was true. The storm had passed, not just the one outside, but the one that had raged in her heart for so long. The fear, the loneliness, the desperation, they were fading. She had fought, she had survived, and now, she had found something she never thought she would again, a place where she and her pups could truly belong. For the first time in what felt like forever, the mother dog closed her eyes, not out of exhaustion or fear, but because, finally, she could rest. The mother dog had survived the storm, both outside and within. Now, inside the safety of the shelter, she and her pups had begun to heal. But survival was only the first step. What came next would determine the course of their future. Days passed, and with each one, the mother grew stronger. The pups had become more playful, their tiny tails wagging as they explored their surroundings with newfound confidence. Volunteers at the shelter adored them, watching as they stumbled over their own feet, yipping excitedly whenever their mother called them back to her side. Despite all the love and care, the mother dog remained watchful. She was no longer as fearful as she had been, but her protective instincts were still strong. Every visitor who approached her pups was met with cautious, golden eyes. She had lost everything before, she would not lose them again. One afternoon, as the sun cast golden beams through the shelter windows, a family arrived. A couple, Anna and Mark, entered with their young daughter, Lily, clutching her mother's hand. They had come looking for a dog to adopt, hoping to find a companion who needed love as much as they had love to give. As they walked past the rows of kennels, Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement. She giggled as she saw the playful puppies tumbling over each other in a pen. But it was the mother dog, sitting quietly beside them, that caught Anna's attention. "She looks like she's been through a lot," Anna murmured to Mark, her voice filled with compassion. Mark nodded. "She has. But look at her, still watching over them, still strong." Lily let go of her mother's hand and crouched near the pen. She extended her small fingers toward the mother dog, who eyed her warily but did not pull away. Slowly, cautiously, the mother dog leaned forward and sniffed the child's hand. Then, to everyone's surprise, she licked Lily's fingers gently. "She likes me." Lily squealed in delight. Alex, standing nearby, observed the interaction with quiet hope. "She's been through a lot," he explained. "It took time for her to trust us, but she's a fighter. And her pups, well, they take after her." Anna crouched beside her daughter. "Do you think she would do well in a home?" she asked. Alex hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "She deserves a home. She's ready, but she'll need patience, love, and time to fully trust again." Mark smiled. "That's exactly what we're here to give." The mother dog watched them carefully, her instincts still protective, but something was different. She sensed no threat from this family. Instead, she saw warmth in their eyes, kindness in their actions. Anna reached out her hand, palm up, waiting. It was an unspoken question. For what felt like forever, the mother dog did nothing. Then, with slow, deliberate movement, she placed her paw on Anna's hand. A silent answer. Lily gasped. She said yes. Tears welled in Anna's eyes as she looked at Alex. "We'd love to give her and her pups a home." For the first time in what felt like forever, the mother dog had not just survived, she had been chosen. A new beginning was waiting, one filled with love, safety, and a family who would never leave her behind. The decision had been made. Anna, Mark, and Lily were not just adopting a puppy, as they had originally planned. They were taking the mother dog, too. The family had seen beyond the playful antics of the pups and recognized the strength, resilience, and unspoken wisdom in the mother's eyes. "Are you sure about this?" Alex asked as he finalized the paperwork. "Most families come in looking for a puppy, not a full-grown dog who has been through as much as she has." Anna nodded firmly. "She deserves a home just as much as they do, maybe even more." Mark agreed. "She's a survivor, and we want to give her a place where she never has to fight for survival again." Lily could hardly contain her excitement. "She's the best mama dog ever. She took care of her babies, now we get to take care of her." The mother dog, still cautious but no longer trembling in fear, watched the exchange with quiet acceptance. Perhaps she sensed that this was the end of her long journey, the moment where she could finally rest and simply be loved. When the time came to leave the shelter, the mother dog was hesitant. The world beyond these walls had not been kind to her before. Would it be different this time? As if sensing her apprehension, Anna knelt beside her and stroked her head gently. "You're safe now," she whispered. "No more cold nights, no more hunger, just love. We promise." The mother dog looked up at her, something shifting in her deep, amber eyes. Then, as if making a choice of her own, she stepped forward, letting herself be led into her new life. Her pups followed closely behind, tumbling over each other in excitement. But for the first time, the mother dog did not feel the crushing weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She was not alone anymore. She had a family, one that had chosen her not because they had to, but because they wanted to. As the shelter doors closed behind them, the mother dog took one last look back at the place where she had been saved. Then, turning toward the warmth of her new home, she walked forward, leaving the past behind. For the first time in a long time, she was not just surviving, she was finally living. The ride home was filled with an air of cautious excitement. The mother dog sat quietly in the back of the car, her pups curled up beside her, their tiny bodies rising and falling in peaceful slumber. She had been on long journeys before, but never one quite like this. There was no fear this time, no sense of impending loss, only the soft hum of the car and the warmth of the family surrounding her. Anna turned from the front seat to check on her. "How's she doing?" Mark glanced down at the mother dog, who was watching the passing scenery with quiet curiosity. "She's calm," he replied. "I think she knows this is something different." Lily, nestled beside her new furry siblings, reached out and gently stroked the mother dog's fur. "You're coming home with us, Mama. We're going to love you forever." The words seemed to sink in. The mother dog let out a soft sigh, resting her head on Lily's lap. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was at peace. Underscore 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 underscore. When they arrived at their house, the mother dog hesitated at the threshold. The scent of a new place filled her nose, unfamiliar yet strangely welcoming. She looked at Anna, who smiled encouragingly. "Come on, sweetheart. This is your home now." The pups had no such reservations, tumbling inside with eager energy, their tiny tails wagging furiously. They explored every corner, sniffing and yipping excitedly. The mother dog watched them for a moment before finally stepping inside. The warmth of the home enveloped her, unlike the bitter cold she had once known. This was no abandoned alleyway, no temporary shelter. This was real, permanent, safe. Mark had already prepared a comfortable bed near the fireplace, layered with soft blankets. "This is all yours," he said, patting the cushioned surface. Cautiously, the mother dog approached and sniffed the blankets. She circled a few times before lying down, her body still tense with the instinct to be on guard. But as Lily curled up beside her and the pups snuggled close, her muscles slowly relaxed. The warmth of the fire, the soothing sounds of a household settling in for the night, it all told her one thing: she was finally home. Underscore 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 underscore. The days that followed were filled with small, beautiful moments of healing. The mother dog, once weary and broken, began to transform. Her fur regained its sheen, her eyes held a new brightness, and the weight she had carried for so long seemed to lift with each passing day. She learned the rhythms of her new life, the morning cuddles from Lily, the afternoon walks with Mark, the quiet evenings by Anna's side. She discovered the joy of play again, chasing her pups through the yard, her tail wagging in a way it hadn't in years. She learned to trust, to lean into the hands that reached out to her, no longer fearing they would bring harm. One evening, as the family sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Anna looked down at their newest family member. "You were meant to be with us," she said softly, scratching behind the mother dog's ears. The mother dog let out a contented sigh, resting her head on Anna's lap. She had once known love, had once had a family, and lost it all. But somehow, fate had brought her here, to another family that saw her worth, not just as the mother of her pups but as a soul deserving of love herself. She was not just surviving anymore. She was home. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The pups grew strong and playful, each developing their own personality. The smallest, a feisty little one named Teddy, was always getting into trouble, while the largest, Bella, was gentle and watchful, much like her mother. The third, Scout, had a spirit of adventure, always leading the others on backyard escapades. And through it all, their mother was there. No longer weak, no longer struggling. She was thriving. She would never forget the pain of her past, but it no longer defined her. She had fought through the storm, and now she had the life she had always deserved. The family often took her and her pups on outings to the park, where she ran freely across the grass, feeling the wind against her face. Strangers would comment on how beautiful she was, how strong and noble she looked. And every time, Anna, Mark, or Lily would smile proudly and say, "She's more than just a beautiful dog. She's a survivor. And she's family." One night, as the family gathered by the fireplace, Lily wrapped her arms around the mother dog's neck. I love you, Mama. The mother dog nuzzled against her, a warmth filling her heart that had nothing to do with the fire burning nearby. She was home, she was safe, and she was loved. Peace at last. The moon cast a silvery glow over the quiet neighborhood, its soft light filtering through the curtains of the cozy home. Inside, the mother dog lay by the fireplace, her body stretched out on the plush bed that had become her sanctuary. The warmth of the flames flickered against her fur, but the warmth she felt deep inside was even greater. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe, truly safe. The pups were curled up beside her, their tiny bodies rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. They had grown so much in just a short time, their once frail bodies now strong and full of energy. The sight of them, nestled so peacefully against her, filled her heart with a deep sense of contentment. She had fought for them, protected them, sacrificed for them, and now they would never have to know the cold, the hunger, the fear that had once been their reality. Lily sat beside her, gently running her fingers through the mother dog's soft fur. "You're happy now, aren't you?" she whispered. The mother dog let out a low sigh, pressing her head against the girl's leg. She didn't need words to answer. She was more than happy, she was complete. Underscore 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 underscore. The days in her new home were filled with peace. She no longer had to wake with the sun in search of food, no longer had to keep her ears alert for danger. The fears that had once ruled her life had faded, replaced by a new, comforting routine. Morning walks in the park, playful afternoons with the pups, evenings spent curled up beside the family as they read or watched movies. Every moment was filled with love, and she cherished each one. The pups had begun to develop their own unique personalities. Teddy, the smallest, was mischievous and bold, always the first to try something new. Bella, the largest, was the gentle leader, keeping her brothers in check. Scout, with his boundless energy, was always exploring, eager to discover something new. They were a handful, but the mother dog wouldn't have had it any other way. Anna often watched the mother dog with admiration. "She has such a strong spirit," she would say to Mark. "After everything she's been through, she still trusts, still loves. It's incredible." Mark would nod, scratching behind the mother dog's ears. "She's a survivor," he'd say with a smile. "And now, she's family." Underscore 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 underscore. One cold evening, a light snowfall dusted the ground outside. The family gathered in the living room, the pups chasing each other around playfully before collapsing in an exhausted heap beside their mother. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with a comforting warmth. Lily wrapped her arms around the mother dog's neck, burying her face in her fur. "I love you, Mama," she whispered. The mother dog closed her eyes, letting out a deep, contented sigh. She had been through so much, pain, loss, hunger, fear, but through it all, she had never given up. She had fought for her pups, had trusted in the kindness of those who had saved her. And now, at long last, she was where she was always meant to be, home. Underscore 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 underscore. As the night deepened, the mother dog listened to the sounds of her family around her. The soft breathing of the pups, the quiet murmuring of Anna and Mark as they spoke in hushed tones, the crackling of the fire. It was all so different from the howling winds and bitter cold she had once known. Here, there was warmth. Here, there was love. She lifted her head slightly, gazing at her sleeping pups. They would grow up knowing only safety, only love, and that was all she had ever wanted for them. She let her head rest once more, closing her eyes. The warmth of the fire, the steady rhythm of her family's presence, it all lulled her into a deep, peaceful sleep. She had fought the hardest battles, faced the cruelest storms, but now, at long last, she could rest. She was finally home, forever. Was it real? Or just a story? You decide. Subscribe for more twists.